for the Proctors Historical Committee. The date today is March 28th, 2014, and we're very pleased to say that we have on the phone from Texas Nancy Lang, who for many, many years ran the tour program at Proctors, as well as really set the whole program up. So Nancy, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Karen.
It's
nice to hear from you.
It's wonderful. I haven't seen you for a long time, and it's such a pleasure that you can participate in this project.
Well, thank you for asking. This is a wonderful opportunity and honor. I did leave Schenectady 5.5 years ago. Doesn't seem that long, but we did leave in June of '08. So this is kind of a homecoming type of thing for me. So I'm very, very happy to do this.
Well, we couldn't be luckier. I'm wondering if you would explain to me how you first got involved with Proctors.
Well, Dick and I started out in September of 1980 as ushers, and it came through, I was a welcome wagon hostess, and I was at some group function, and somebody said they need ushers, they need people to help out at Proctors, and I said, well, gee, Dick and I could do that. There'd be two of us, one phone call and two people. And so I forget who it was we contacted, but ultimately I think it was Dave Gillespie, and we got involved as ushers, and that was in 1980, around September 1980. And then we ushered and worked on fundraisers and wherever they needed us. And then it was fall of 1991 that Gloria Lemire, who of course was executive director at that time, approached Dick and I and asked, because we showed some interest in tours and the history of the theater. So she asked us if we would like to take over. The gal who had been doing it on a very, very informal basis was leaving the area, going to Cape Cod, Sandy, somebody, and so there was no one to take over. So she asked us, and we felt very, very honored because she placed so much faith in us. There were no restrictions. We weren't told what we could or couldn't do. We had such enormous support from the staff. And so we started getting our act together late in 91, but didn't actually do the first tour until January 1992. And Gloria also said the theater would pay for a couple of ads, one in an Albany paper and one in the Schenectady paper. And so we thought that was fantastic because that had not happened before. So we had our very first tour January 1992, and when I think back on that, here it was January. Our great concern, of course, was weather, and the other was, would anyone show up? And so Dick and I appeared that morning just hoping and praying that this was all going to come together, and over 80 people showed up, and we were just absolutely thrilled, overwhelmed. We had all kinds of wonderful emotions. And at that time, the Guild Room, was down there right off the arcade. And so we gathered everyone in the Guild Room and started there and then proceeded into the theater and throughout the whole theater. We eventually eliminated starting in the Guild Room because it took too much time. There were so many people that kept showing up for our tours, 100, 125, month after month after month. And it was just too many people to move around, and it wasted too much time. So that was how we got started with the theater. It was back in 1980 with ushering, and then we showed interest in the tours, and then we took over in late '91.
That sounds very exciting. I know that I have a document here that has been used by the tour guides called Information for Proctors Theater Tour Guides. And you were instrumental in creating the original version of this. The one I have right now is dated 2011, but it's been a work. So a lot of things of the history of the theater and the documentation that the tour guides have, I think are research that you were involved in, aren't they?
Yes, yeah.
So
we
how
did
did
a
you
ton
go
of research
do that?
for the theater.
How did you do that?
Where
did you go? What did you do?
What happened was, with all of these people showing up month after month, we realized a couple things right away. How do we handle that many people so that everyone can hear and see? And we had no model to go by. We didn't have anybody that we could go to say, how do you do this? We had to come up with all these ideas ourselves. So every time something new came up, we just had to get our heads together and figure out what would we want to do. Our first thought was, when we did tours, was this building stands here. Let's try to get as many people into this theater as possible and tell the Proctor story. But we realized as all these people kept coming and asking us questions, while we did have some information, we realized we didn't have enough information. And so Dick and I just began reaching out wherever we could to get more history on the theater, but we would not add anything to our notes that we couldn't verify. And one of the things that did happen, I'm sure you remember a man by the name of Francis Poland.
Yes.
Francis died. Francis was a historian. He had done a lot of research on theater in Schenectady, not just Proctors, but theater in general, from the late 1800s to the mid-1900s. And he had passed away, and his wife graciously gave to the theater 20 loose-leaf notebooks, about 2 inches thick, of material that he had accumulated. And once we saw that, we began bringing those loose-leaf books home. And it was very difficult for us to go through that because they were not in any particular order, and they were copies of copies, so they were difficult to read. However, we came up with lots of wonderful tidbits and information that we could verify from newspaper articles. And then we began adding that to us. And then we also became friendly with a man by the name of Herman Galbraith, who was involved in the Historical Society downstate, where Mr. and Mrs. Proctor had a summer home.
Yes.
In the Larchmont area, down Central Valley, I guess it was. And he was fabulous with sharing information with us, and we shared information with him. We got lots of information going back from us. Those were our two greatest sources of information on the theater, and we did come up with a lot of great stuff going back all the way back to Mr. Proctor's family, way back in the 1800s. So a lot of that has been put into our notes.
And
that's also, I don't know whether you have heard the story of the Titanic.
go ahead, tell it. This
that,
is for stories, this show. Go ahead and tell us.
We had heard the story, but we couldn't verify it. And we saw an article in one of these notebooks that Francis Poland had left. What had happened was, in the fall of 2011 into 2012, Mr. and Mrs. Proctor, along with friends of theirs, Henry and Renee Harris from New York City, spent the winter in England. At that time, he had leased his very first theater in Schenectady, down Lower State Street, and it was being readied for an April 2012 opening. They found as they went along they could open earlier than planned, and so a man by the name of Guy Graves, who was in his New York City office, but later was working in Troy, sent him a cablegram to say this would be ready earlier. Did they want to be there? And he said, oh, yes. So they changed their plans, came back early, and did go to that opening. The ship they were supposed to come back on was the Titanic. They came back on the Olympia, but Mr. and Mrs. Harris stayed. They did not change their plans. Mr. Harris did go down with the Titanic. Mrs. Harris came back, and they owned a theater in New York City, which she continued to run for 20 more years. So you might say that the first Proctor's Theater, which incidentally eventually became the Erie, was the thing that saved his life. And we'd heard that story, and once I could see the newspaper article, then I knew it was for real, and then we included that in our notes, and we tell that on our tour. So that's just a little side issue of how we got information, how we added to the history of the theater.
So the Francis...
I'm sorry, I didn't mean...
The Francis Poulin...
Didn't mean to keep going. Go ahead.
The Francis Poulin books were mostly newspaper clippings?
Yes, mostly newspaper clippings. He also had some originals of other documents and things like that. But we stuck mostly to Proctor's history. He had a lot of history on a lot of other theaters in the Schenectady area in the late 1800s. Most people don't realize that there were lots of small little theaters. Of course, none of them had sound because sound had not been developed yet. But we were most interested in what was going on at Proctor's. And so that was one of the biggest stories that we got. And I was so glad because we had heard the story, but I wanted to be able to verify it. So that's what that is primarily where we got lots of our information, was his information, and also this Herman Galbraith from the Historical Society down in Central Valley.
You also you also documented some of the early developments of Proctor's, how the corporation was formed and so forth, didn't you?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the last part of that question.
You also documented some of the early history of Proctor's, how the corporation was formed, what was going on at the time, the 400
Yes.
block and so forth.
Yeah, that too came a lot from that material that Francis Poland had. The fact that he built the theater in 1926, he then sold it to RKO in 1929, early to mid 1929. Then he passed away, of course, in 1929. And then we had in our notes the history of the ownership of the theater. The Fabian family owned it and leased it, and then I guess they leased it first, and then they owned it. But yes, we got a lot of that information from him. And also, one of the great bits of information came through this Herman Galbraith, who I became friends with from the Historical Society in Central Valley, somehow or other hooked up with a great nephew of Mr. Proctor.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the association came through a sister, his sister Ella, who had a son, who had a daughter, who had a son, and he put together history of the five generations of the Proctor family. And when Herman got that, he contacted me and said, "I've got something you're going to just absolutely love." And so he shared that with us, sent me a copy. I made copies, shared it with all of the tour guides. And that gives a lot of information about the Proctor family itself, going back 5 generations. But it was probably through Poland's information that I got most of the information on the ownership of the theater itself. I'm trying to remember here I have some information somewhere in my notes about the ownership going from Proctor to RKO to Fabian to several more stops along the way, and finally ending up with an AMAJ Limited, which was John Matarazzo. And that's when the theater finally went into disrepair, and that's when the city of Schenectady took it over. And that was in the 1970s, 77,
Right.
57, something in
Well,
along there.
the Axe Corporation was formed in 77.
Yeah, I hope I'm answering your question because I'm having some difficulty hearing you.
Okay, you're doing great.
So if I go off of subject, just let me know.
We'll lasso you in, which is appropriate for Texas.
Excuse me, say that again?
I said we'll lasso you back in because now you're in Texas. That would be the appropriate way.
Yeah.
So Nancy, you were like unbelievably organized in organizing these tours. And I remember you used to every year give a report on how many people had tours. So do you remember?
Oh, yes.
Approximately how many tours had you and the tour guides given before you left?
Well, It was more not so many tours as it was total people.
Okay.
I would just keep a record as time went on, and we were something over 17,000 people from January of '92 through to about June of '08. So that was little over 16 years, not quite 17 years. So when I turned it over to Marilyn Sassy, and I incidentally Marilyn and I keep touch with each other, which I love doing. But it was over 17,000, and I guess she in the last 5 years, I'm sure, is over 20,000, probably low 20s. But our goal was to, as I said, try to get as many people into that theater as possible because we wanted them to know about this wonderful jewel in downtown Schenectady. And the research on the theater came as somewhat of a side issue. We hadn't started out with that, but it came about because we realized so many people were so interested in this theater and the background and the history that it motivated us to go on and go on and research as much as we could. We found it difficult, though, to find too much, say, in the library or the Historical Society of Schenectady. These other things came up, which we hadn't even dreamed of or thought of, but they were there, they presented themselves, and we just hopped on it when all of those wonderful notebooks from Francis Poland came along. That was a huge source of information, and then this Herman Galbraith from the Historical Society. Those are two of the places that we found most of the information about the theater and about Proctor himself. So anyway, it was it's been kind of for us a labor of love. It was something that we loved doing, and it was something that Dick and I could do together and share. So it sort of worked out great for everybody as we go back and think about it.
I
for the
think
theater, and the fact that Gloria had placed so much faith in us, that motivated us, I guess, to try to do as good a job as we could.
I know we must give credit to Dick because I remember at one point we used to see him in the Proctor's offices every few days because he was your copy specialist and errand running specialist. And he would come in with a lot of information that had to be copied for you.
Yes, he would go down. I would do all the contacting on the phone, write out all of the material that we needed, and then he had to go down and make copies because different people had to be notified that there was going to be a tour. Yes, he would do that, and he loved doing it. That worked out real well, and that's where the staff was so supportive of us. Nobody ever objected to what we were doing. They were incredibly supportive in that, and we always appreciated that. We really did. We tried to let people know that we did, and because that's what we needed to be successful, to not have any restrictions, and for us to make the theater look as good as possible. But people seem to enjoy going through the theater, and they seem to enjoy hearing about the history of the theater and the background. And then we brought in Mr. Proctor and his family, which had not ever been done before. But it was, it was a project that we didn't have any role model. We didn't have anybody to go to say, how did you do this? Everything we tried was brand new. The fact that we added the organ was another interesting situation.
How did that happen?
Summer of 19, if I can go off on this subject.
Sure.
Can I?
Yes, you may. Talk about how the organ got in the tours.
Yeah. Ned Spain, who was an organist there, I was not familiar with him until he called me the summer of '92. It was around June or July. He had been seeing our ads, and he called and said, would you like me to come play the organ? And I said, Ned, I would love for you to come play the organ. However, we don't have any money to work with. I can't pay you. And he said, well, as long as you're not charging for the tours, I won't charge for the organ. And I said, that's fantastic. So then we had to try to figure out when do we have him play the organ during this tour, which was taking about an hour and a half. So we finally got our heads together and said, well, it would be appropriate at the end of the tour because now everything is over with. We'd have all the people down from the balcony and the backstage and so forth. And so that's what we did. We put it at the end of the tour. We let him have about a half an hour, and he would start out by telling them about the organ and showing them what it could do, the different sounds. They loved that, especially the yucca horn. That was always the fun part. And then he would ask them, what would you like me to play? And so they would shout out, different pieces. And that went over very, very well. So that was just another little thing that came up. It was just somebody who called us, said, can I help? And we said yes. And we thought it was very appropriate to add to the tour because originally the organ had been such a huge, a huge part of the theater back in 1929 and certainly into the mid-30s. So we felt very grateful that someone would want to do that for us. So we formed quite a nice relationship and friendship with Ned that we hung on to for the entire 17 years, 16, 17 years that we did that. So that was just another little wonderful addition.
I think you would like to know.
And I think they're still doing that today.
They are, Nancy, and I think that you would like to know that in the last week and a half there was a special tour that was a birthday party for Mr. Proctor, and Ned Spain was there playing.
Good.
And one of the things about Ned, because he actually plays by ear, he doesn't use music that much, is that he can play almost any song he's ever heard. So he's quite fascinating. And he seems to feel this is a mission that he's got to stick with, so he's still doing that. And the tour guides are still having tours. One of the differences, perhaps, is that you had tours almost every month, didn't you?
Correct, we did. But you see, we were able to get it on the theater schedule, and I realize now the theater schedule is very, very full, so it's extremely difficult to get those tours. And we also found, that was another experiment when we were setting these up, what day should we pick? And so we finally decided on a Saturday morning because that's when most people are available. We want to have a tour when people are available. And I do understand that your schedule is now so busy that it's very difficult for you to find a Saturday morning.
So we're doing it, and it's just not as often, unfortunately. But the other part of the tours is that small groups do request tours, and that started, of course, under you. Can you remember the kinds of groups that used to come and want private tours?
Yes, that was another thing that we started. When we, as they say, when we started this, we focused first on the open tours, what we call the open tours on a Saturday morning about once a month. And then we found that we were getting phone calls from different people. It could be a senior group. It could be homeschooled children. It could be an antique group. It could be almost any. We call those private tours. And those we would schedule as much as possible to suit the person asking for the tour and the theater schedule. I would try to have them give me 2 or 3 different dates or times that would suit their schedule, and then I'd say, well, I've got to go to the theater schedule now and see if I can get it on the schedule. And 90% of the time I usually could, especially if they gave me 2 or 3 different dates. And we would have children's groups, as I say, seniors groups. We had a number of antique groups. There was a high school out in Latham that every couple of years had foreign students, mostly from Russia, who could speak English. And we did some tours for them through an interpreter. But those private tours became very popular, and we were doing, like 2 and 3 a month for a while, particularly early on when everything was so new and people were interested. And that went over very well also. So we always published tried to tell people or publicize that we did private tours as well as the open tour once a month. And I think for a long time the open tours were so successful because they hadn't been done before, not in the amounts that we were doing. So we had lots and lots of people, and I realized it's difficult to have an open tour once a month and continually get 100 people. That's just, that would be very difficult 20 years out. But I think we got such a response because we were so new, and people were taking advantage of the ads that we had. So that worked out really very, very nicely for us. But yes, we did add the private tours, mostly because people began asking about it. Everything that we did in the tours was something that came up, and then we had to try to figure out how to do it, how to work with it. We just had no role models.
How many people approximately worked on the tours with you at any one time?
At first it was like a couple of people. There was Ed Heischerman was with us, Betty Kleiber, and then Ed kind of dropped out. He was doing other things. Betty stayed with us. And then we began adding other people, and usually we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 6, 5 or 6 in addition to Dick and I. And we had that many because when tours come up, I would have to try to see what tour guide would be available. They, all the tour guides were doing other things, and so they weren't always available. So it worked out, we thought, very well to have that many, 6 or 7 of us. And at our open tours, we found we were using 3 and 4 people because we had so many people coming that we couldn't walk through with 100. We always divided, so you needed at least 3 people usually to take care of that many people. But we had great tour guides. Oh, they were the nicest people. They were the most committed, hardworking people. We were always so grateful for their work. They were people we could rely on all the time, and they loved the theater. And they learned. We always shared all our information with all the tour guides, and they were so good about telling about the history and the background of the theater. And I guess Maryland now probably has at least a half a dozen people. But it was probably, in addition to Dick and I, another 4 to 5 people. I would say we had probably 6 to 7 total.
Well, we're very lucky.
And we had sometimes our tour guides, stayed with us a year or 2, and then they got involved in something else. So there was a slight turnover, but not too much. Not too much.
There are always rave reviews on those tours, and the particular group that I hear them from are high school reunion classes who are just thrilled to see.
Yes, we did do quite a few high school reunions. We did indeed. We always liked that because a lot of the people that came to those reunions, of course, were people that were out of town and had known the theater back when they were little and then hadn't seen or heard about the theater for many, many years, or they heard about it when it was in its decline and didn't realize the marvelous things that were going on there, all the restoration and so forth, and all the wonderful shows that went on. So they were quite thrilled to come back to a reunion, a 3-day reunion, and one of the afternoons was going to be at Proctors Theater. Yes, we had a lot of nice feedback from that kind of tour we did. It was such a broad spectrum of private tours that we did. We even got into some of the companies had groups that were formed, and they wanted to come to the tours, and we tried to accommodate them like at 5 o'clock or 5:30. We had some very weird hours that we were doing tours. And this is where the support from the stage crew came in also. They were always so supportive because we were always trying to work around something. We tended not to do a tour if there was a production on stage and there were props and clothes and things of that sort. We just didn't want to assume that kind of responsibility for anything happening. So we tried to have the tours when there was nothing else going on. But the stage crew were very supportive of us and very, very helpful.
Nancy, in all your tours, did you ever find the ghost of Proctors?
No, I didn't. I really didn't. We never came upon anything that was unusual or ghost-like. I know Marilyn has started some ghost tours, but I couldn't help her with that. I couldn't add anything to that because there was never anything that was, out of order or out of whack or anything of that sort. No, I never had anything, and I don't think Dick did either. I think that he would have said something. I guess maybe some other people have, but no, I didn't ever notice anything at all.
So
It would have been in our notes. Had I noticed anything, I can assure you, it would have been in our notes.
but you do know what the ghost light is, right?
Oh, yes, the ghost light, that we knew. We knew that, and we did add that to our notes, and we used to tell people about it. But there was no indication to us of anything going on that was unusual or different.
So just since we brought it up, tell everyone what the ghost light is.
Well, the ghost light is that light that's really a bare bulb on a stand that is brought out at the end of each show, at the end of each evening, and it's put in the middle of the stage, and there's this bare light that's turned on, and that's to keep the ghosts away and the spirits away. And then the next morning, whoever comes in and whoever is starting whatever on the stage removes the ghost light, puts it back over in a corner, and then that night the ghost light comes back out again. That's mostly what we knew about it.
Do you have anything else you'd like to tell us about your experiences with the tours?
Well, of course, I will go back to 1991 and the faith that Gloria Lemire had in us and placed in us and gave Dick and I this marvelous opportunity of working together on a project that we loved because we loved old theaters. That to me always stands out as something that's very special, that she would have given us that chance. And the fact that we did the tours and expanded it and included so many people and got so many people into the theater that might not have come backstage, for instance. I hope that in doing that we maybe helped with sales, encourage people to come back and buy tickets. We would even encourage people to try seats out and then remember the row and the aisle and so forth to try, when they were going to buy tickets. So I guess I would start with that and just say that was always very special. And then all of the support the people at the theater gave us. And just going through it and giving so many people so much pleasure for a couple of hours that was totally free. We never charged. We never charged for the tours. So, I have nothing but positive feelings about the theater that gave us 28 years we were involved with the theater. I have nothing but positive, wonderful feelings about all of it. Whether we were ushering, whether we were doing tours, we felt so honored and grateful to have had that opportunity in our lives, especially now that Dick's passed away. It's just something, it's a wonderful memory. And now that I'm a couple thousand miles away, and I doubt that I always wish that I could have gotten back there for a visit, but I doubt that I will be able to do that. But it's just a very pleasant time in my life, and I'm glad that Dick and I were able to contribute and add something to the theater, because that's a special jewel. I've always felt it was a jewel in downtown Schenectady.
Well, Nancy,
I hope I've answered, lots of your questions about the theater and about how we got started and the things that we did. As I say, we just had to kind of use our brains and try to figure out how to present the tours, and I'm glad that it's kind of been an enduring legacy, because they're still going on since 1992, and here we are 22 years later. Tours are still a big part of the theater, and that's great. I think that's just a fabulous thing to happen.
Nancy, I want to thank you for your time today, and you're exactly right. Your leadership and Dick's as the longest serving probably tour guide and the people who put together this wonderful compendium of the history of Proctors, so that all the people who are tour guides today can have some base information to begin with. Thank you for participating in the Proctors Historical Committee project to put on video some of the key people in the history of Proctors. I want to repeat again that the date today is March 28th, 2014, and we've had Nancy Lang and a picture behind us of her husband Dick Lang, who were leaders in strengthening and growing the Proctors tour program, so that, as Nancy said, over 17,000 people, well, they did that job, had the chance to come to Proctors. Thank you all for watching today.
Thanks, Karen, for this opportunity. This is very, very nice. I appreciate this so much. And good luck to all of you on all your endeavors.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.